Well, finally we get to color. We ended that last module with Romanticism, which brings us up to the late 1800s. And although we've just talked about history so far, you've been using the visual art vocabulary to describe those. By the time you get to the late 1800s, we're moving into the modern period. Now, that section on Renaissance to Romanticism was actually very important because we just kept stylistically flip-flopping between the classical and the Hellenistic Greek. By modernism, there's reasons we shift, that we stop doing that artists stop doing that. There's many reasons. Certainly shifts in the culture, our culture, Western culture, but I'm just going to point out several things. Number one, by the time you have the invention, by the time you have new technology, it's an invention called the camera. The camera. That changes everything. Now, in your text, it talks about the history of the camera, which is using film, developing film, light-sensitive film, and of course now you use your digital cameras, even on your phone. So the camera actually hasn't been around that long. It's around, I think, 1826. So then you've got a period, okay, well, you've got to start, then when does it become popular, or when is it being used? So that you can see it being used in a culture. So that takes, a couple decades. So to make a very long story short, color, because of the camera, color becomes important. And that happens. Now, color was always important. I'm not saying it wasn't. How Caravaggio uses color is very important. I mean, you're using color. If it's a fresco, The Last Supper, you're using color. But what happens is color actually becomes a subject of painting. That's important, and that's at the end of this PowerPoint. I'm saying, look, you now have to cross into the 20th century. Well, we're 21st century, and you need to not think about painting as just the subject is something recognizable. It's representational. And so in these brief 2 weeks we have left, I'm going to do this whirlwind survey of styles you should know and very exciting contemporary styles. And what I've done is I want you to know certain styles because we still pull from them. We are still influenced by them. And they're sort of the underpinnings of contemporary art today. So if you see any contemporary art around the world, if it's Eurocentric, which is us, then you're going to see where that came from, a root of a style, because really we're just a series of appropriating styles, reappropriating, and then putting it in a contemporary context. I'll explain that a little later as we proceed. So that's what I need to build upon in this short period of time. So if we're going to move away from just looking at the subject and the context in which that subject was created, for example, what classical Greek sculpture, Hellenistic sculpture, yada, 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 fresco, Renaissance. When you have the camera, the artists are saying, well, first of all, many artists said, well, art is dead because we have the painters, we have the camera. Well, not true. For other artists, it was like, yes, we are liberated. We are liberated in ways we were not before. And so this PowerPoint, in the beginning, I'm just going to talk about the color wheel, but it ends with relating this to Romanticism and Turner, because Turner, that last slide in the Romantic period, see, that was about color, students. Yeah, the subject was what, that snowstorm, but see, he's early modernism. He's actually in the Romantic style, it doesn't matter. The color wheel is so exciting because this is something that you will be able to use and understand and apply in your own life. And then, of course, I'm also going to bring in some other of the elements of art, as well as some vocabulary that if it was a regular 16-week session, I'd be saying, okay, these are types of sculpture, these are types of paintings. I'm still going to incorporate that in some of the slides. You're just not going to be tested on it. So we'll continue with that. The color wheel. I'm just so excited to be here because color is everything. And I'm going to explain to you how designers, how we artists, designers use it, interior decorators use it, so you can use it. Okay? So, everything is actually a system. Color is based on the color wheel that was designed. This is a basic 6, what is this? 1, 2, 3, whatever. Looks like a 12 color wheel. Doesn't matter. You can reduce the color wheel, which we're going to look at, to 6 colors. You can actually reduce it to 3, the primary colors, and we'll talk about that. So as you remember in grade school, your little teacher said, okay, these are the primary colors. Learn your primary colors. All right, now we're going to mix yellow and blue, and we get what? Green. Well, those are your secondary. So as a child, you're learning how to mix colors. So you forgot maybe that it's based on the color wheel. And this is what designers use today, and you're going to understand it because color has so many, well, it has its properties that we'll talk about, and it has its characteristics. We'll talk about that. In the video that I post YouTube, the guy says he's, I'm not sure where he's from, but he says the word hue. We say hue. He calls it, his language is a little different. We say hue, H-U-E. Hue is color. Yellow is a hue, okay? So let's look at this, and then we're going to end with me showing you how this is used, some brief examples, and then I guess the next PowerPoint will get into this skip through modernism and some really iconic paintings and styles that you need to know. So here you go. Here's your 3 primary colors. Primary, blue, yellow, red. Blue, yellow, red. So when I mix yellow and red, I get orange. That's my secondary, right? When I mix yellow and blue, I get green. And then when I mix red and blue, I get purple, violet, whatever you want to call it. So now we can expand this. This is a much more expanded, and so the more we keep mixing these, they're called tertiary. But this could be, you know, this is, and we haven't even added, this is like pure color. We haven't added any black to it, or white to it, or gray to it. So there's so many colors. I mean, I can't put a number on it. It's vast. So those are 3 primaries. Well, where do these colors come from? They come from rocks and natural elements that we find in nature. I saw some beautiful, just striking on a tree where there was a lot of overgrowth. It was lichen, or no, it wasn't mold, it was like lichen at the bottom of the tree, and it was as yellow as that yellow you're seeing right there. It was beautiful. Okay, so primary, secondary. Now color, there's several kinds. Number 1, refractive color is an example is the rainbow, because color is actually in light, right? In light. But it takes a spectrum to take light and break it down into that rainbow of the color in light. And by the way, different species sees more color than others. So we sort of see a limited range, but there are fish down that live deeper down into oceans that see 4 times as many colors as we see. Okay? And if you're color blind, you may not see color at all or a limited range. So some insects see a greater range of colors than we do. We're actually very limited. Anyway, so that is refractive color when it's refracted with a prism. And then what artists use is reflected color, which is this right here. So what happens is, let's say you take a lemon. The reason you see the color or the hue, yellow, is because all those other colors are being absorbed and that lemon is only reflecting back to you yellow. So that's reflected color. And so this is, this reflected color we buy in tubes of paint. You go to the store if you're going to paint your house, your interior, whatever, that's reflected color. And then the third type is what you have actually online. And as you can see, this red, yellow, blue, this is not, I'm sorry, this is red, yellow, green, I'm sorry. This was not updated. I'll update this on your PowerPoint. This is supposed to be red, yellow, yellow, and blue. That is your primary, okay? Over here, this is online, and this is red, green, and blue. Those are the way that online mixes light. So it's very different. In my world, since I'm an artist, not an online artist, I'm not really concerned about that. The RGB, I'm concerned about the RY blue. Okay. So like I said, I'll change that on the PowerPoint. Now, here you go. Here's your color wheel. Primary, red, yellow, blue. Already you're seeing that's a triangle, right? So when we mix those two primaries, we get our secondary. So yellow and red make orange. If you have more yellow, then it's a yellow-orange. If you have more red, then it's red-orange. And then this goes on forever, okay? So those are your secondary colors. Now, you take the color wheel, and this is the system. If you separate it in half, and these are, the, now I'm not sure if I said properties or characteristics, but if you separate that color wheel in half, this half is the warm side. The red to yellow. That's the warm. Now this is a green, this is a warm green, this is a cool green. Okay. So if you separate it, this is the warm side, this is the cool side. Okay? All right. Now, that is a characteristic of color that it has temperature. I'm going to go over that a little bit later. And so that's the easiest way to remember this. And I'm going to talk about what these colors do, some other characteristics. Well, why do we say that's warm? Well, because fire is warm. Because when we look out in the ocean, actually the water is clear, but the blue sky is reflected, and we think of coolness, all right? So these are not, psychologically we experience these like a hot day, that hot sun. By the way, colors also in a culture can be very symbolic, but these are more psychological, how we sense that that's a cool and a warm color. So these are the properties of color. Now, first of all, hue is the name of a color. You say that hue is yellow or that hue is red. And then saturation of value. Now, this, I don't think this diagram shows it clearly, but let me explain. A saturation is the brightest a color can be. So if I take red, cadmium red light out of the tube, that is the brightest it can be. If I do anything to it, I take away, okay, from that intensity. Okay? So that's what that means. All right. I'm desaturating it. Well, and this is a hard concept to understand, but color has value in it. Now, value is black to white and all the grays in between. All right? Black and white is not a color. It's value. And so let me give you an example. So if you look at a yellow lemon and you look at a red apple and you make that in your mind black and white, yellow is lighter than red. Okay? That's the value in color. So I'm going to show you an example of that as well. So those are the actual properties of color, but there's many characteristics. Cool and warm is one of them. So look, here's an example. So here's a beautiful image of an ad about nail polish. And this color palette, we'll talk about that later. So these are these warm, to me, they're warm tones of that color. Now, if I have taken a picture of that, and you can do that with a phone, take a picture of anything, then you go into your editing on your phone and you change it to black and white. This shows you, students, the value, the grays, the black and white in this. So you see color, but we see value in that. So you see this white, there it is. Contrast. Where all this is actually a very, but this is what this designer is doing. This whole range of this beautiful, warm, this is a neutral, I would call this a neutral color, is balanced by this. This is contrast. So that's an example of value in color, and also how a designer is using this to create your interest. And so you look at that and you say, oh, you're not thinking about this, but you're saying subliminally or subconsciously, oh, that's very beautiful, everything is very subtle, and you're not even looking at this white top. But that's there as a focal point. Again, that's element design, isn't it? So that's an example of value in color, and there you see just the value. Okay? Now, okay, these are the words. Shades. What's the shade of that color? Just means you're going to, well, you're going to change the saturation, obviously, but you're going to add black. When you add white to a color, that's called a tint. When you add gray to a color, that's called a tone. So this is showing you how this is black is added to, this is the same color, this teal or turquoise. So here's a little black added, more black, until you lose your color. But actually, and I'm going to notate this as well, black and white have temperature too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's gray. Gray is a wonderful way of getting rich colors. Very, high-end clothing. It's created in this way. That's why it is like has a full body to it. It's a little more lengthy process, but it's not just bright. It's like that mid-range that is very beautiful. And so here's tinting. When you add white, you see, you're tinting. You say, well, I want light blue. You're tinting the blue, okay? So this just says this is called a tone when you add gray. That's very important to the art students to understand that, because these are midtones, and usually a student will just want to add black or white. Okay, now, so here's a color wheel again. This is what I'm saying. Color has movement. It will visually advance or recede. And so the cool side, the cool colors, and I'll just stay in this range, recede visually. They go back in space. Where the warm colors, here's the warm, advance. Visually, they come towards you. So an example would be if you have a really small room, say your dining room, and you really want it to be red. You love red. Well, if you paint your dining room and it's small red, it's going to look even smaller. So that's why if you want it to look larger, you paint it with a cool color. But if you really love red, you could just paint one wall red. All right. So color actually has movement. This is important when we look at these paintings because these artists are using this. Temperature. We already talked about that. This is the warm side. If you split this, this is the cool side. Okay? This is what I'm saying. All black and white has temperature too, but you have to compare. So if you compare two pieces of paper, you will see that one is a white, like cool white, and another one, which it looked white, is actually a warm white. And so it's like not quite buff, but maybe an eggshell. So even black and white have temperature. Black has a temperature. Is it a cool black or is it a warm black? And so this relates to, to skin tones. Is your skin, no matter what color you are, it's going to go warm or cool. And of course that has a lot to do with, if we understand that, clothing. What clothing doesn't look good against our skin? What color, rather, of clothing? So that's important. And also colors have weight. Darker colors are heavier in weight. Lighter colors, obviously, like this yellow is not as visually heavy as this blue, visually. This is what we use to balance works. This is what artists use. All these characteristics are used to balance works of art. And I'll, if I remember, I'll talk about that more technically when we look at some works and say, okay, this is how this is being used, okay? So this really isn't that complex. Now, what I did is there's a link to, and I have it in this PowerPoint that I added to the module, and you can click on a color, and then you can pick any, and it will create a color scheme when you pick the color scheme. So color schemes are important. And this is important for you to know that monochromatic is variations of one hue. Right there, right? So that hand ad that we looked at, that was monochromatic. Okay? Monochromatic. All right, that's monochromatic, one. Then you have a color scheme called analogous, and that means when you create, variations, well, using colors next to each other on the color wheel. Again, the color wheel is the foundation to understand these color schemes. So that's analogous, next to each other, okay? Complementary is colors across from each other, opposite. And so these are complementary colors. What happens is, in color theory, these actually, when they're placed next to each other, make each other even brighter, complementary colors. And that's why you have a lot of professional athletic teams that they will have complementary colors, like yellow and purple, because that's pretty close, depending if that yellow is over here, because those colors make each other look brighter, as well as black and white make each other look brighter, like white next to black. And that's why tuxedo, black and white tuxedo, is very appealing, because the white makes the black look richer, and the black makes the white look crisper, okay? So the philosophy in that and the truth in that is contrast enhances each other, okay? So that is complementary. Notice that's the E. If you pay me a compliment, that would be an I. This is an E. Complementary are opposites across from each other on the color wheel. That's a color scheme. And then a triad. This is what a lot of parents do with children's room. They pick this. They pick this, red, green, and blue, as a nice way to do a child's room because they're really bright. So if you make a triangle, you could do yellow, teal, and this color right here. This pink, hot pink color. That's a triad. So it's any of these combinations in a triadal shape is your triad color scheme. So you can now go back to this right here, and I'll see if I can pick it up, and I don't think I can. I don't want to lose this PowerPoint, but if you go back, and this is at the beginning of the module, you can go back in and play with that. You just pick a color on that beautiful color palette, and then you go down and you pick your scheme, and it will show you some colors. So now you know. Now, color and modernism. This is what I talked about in the very beginning. Now I'm sort of coming full circle so I can get you to the styles in modernism. And so here's where we ended with Turner. The Romantic period, to me, is modern because, and this is 1842. Remember what I said, the camera was developed or invented around 1826. Don't hold me to that year, but around then. And so, you know, artists are liberated not to paint these descriptive, what we would call realistic sort of kind of paintings. Because here you have a camera. Take a picture. So this is a sunset on a lake. This is Turner's painting, part of his painting. Sunset over a lake. You see the difference? Students, this is about color. And that's crossing the bridge. It is abstract. And so you need to cross that bridge. And it's going to get a little challenging, but you can do it. So this is where we're really going to start with in that next PowerPoint with Monet, Claude Monet, who is an Impressionist painter. And these are all paintings of the Rouen Cathedral that he did. Many paintings. And so look at these. So what is this? Well, this is Impressionism. Impressionism is a time of day, time of year, weather condition that he is interpreting this cathedral, same cathedral, with color. His painting, students, are about color. Yeah, you see a cathedral, you'd say, well, that's the subject, and I would say the subject is color. But you could say, well, the subject is the cathedral, and that's my office light going off. The content is color, the effects of color during a time of year, time of day, weather condition. And, you know, if you go to the shore, let's say you go down to the beach, and it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's no clouds. That is some bright light. You don't hardly see any color. But as the sun sets, or if it's early morning, the color changes, the palette changes, and it evokes a totally different kind of experiential experience about that location, that place, that landscape, that seaside, because of the time of day. So this is that experience. Okay? So here's a few examples of you crossing the bridge into the 20th century, and this is a Fauve painter, Matisse. He's known for other things, but the name of this is the Red Studio. And you go, what? These things are floating around. This painter can't draw. Don't go there. This is about something else. These painters could draw anything they wanted in a highly representational style. By the time you get a Cameron modernism, you know, painting becomes about something else than just a describing a subject. And this is about color. And then by the time you get this in a gallery, and this is a gal looking at these two paintings, and we're going to look at abstract expressionist painters. And this is Rothko, and this is about color, the effects of color. And he was a particular type of abstract expressionist painter, and it was more about, his work was more about sort of meditative kind of painting using color, where you're going to see that Jackson Pollock is about color and movement and line. Okay? So those are just two of many styles, that the style is about color. And so when you don't see a subject here, for example, now you know it's about color. So don't look for a person sitting at a table, or, you know, the Last Supper, some kind of event where a person is involved, or an animal, or a still life. If you do, you've missed the boat. It's not about that. That boat has sailed. So here I just, you know, here's ways an artist uses to express color. So this is in your book, and this is Connie Skoglund, and this is an installation artist. This is a sculpture. It's called installation art. By the time you get to the 80s, you know, you don't even have, she's an installation artist. That's not really a style. It's a way of working, because you could look historically other installation works, but they weren't called that. They weren't called that. But this is installation, and as you can see, this is these cats are very bright. This is title of this is I don't even see the title here. It's something like, I'm sorry, I left it off. Radiation Cats or something. And so this is a good example of just color being used, you know, by a sculptor to create installation. And then on your right is something that is a new movement that is called Afrofuturism. This is computer graphics. I don't know the name of this artist, but as you can see, this artist is using color in a very significant way to evoke an idea. And of course, Afrofuturism is relative right now. It's been around for quite a while, but this is pretty new, how this artist is using color. So you would look at these and you say, okay, I see the subject, you know, I see the subject of this female, and then there's a bird, and what is this sort of, you know, this flying saucer, and here's cats. But you have to understand that art is more than just subject. It's about design. It's about the elements of art, because that's our language. That's the language we use to express an idea, and that language, you use some of it at the very beginning, and you'll continue to build on it. So I end with this slide because here's Michelle Obama, and here is her official portrait. Okay, and when you think about the first ladies, and they had their portrait done, how they were standing there, and they looked very, well, however they wanted to be represented. Well, Michelle Obama, she selects a contemporary artist, a contemporary African-American artist, and that's who she wants her portrait painted by, as well as Barack Obama. He wanted Kehinde Wiley. So these folks were very, I don't want to say hip, but very tuned to what was happening in pop culture. They knew contemporary artists, what was going on, and they wanted these contemporary artists to represent them for all history. And so you would look at this painting and you say, well, wait a minute, this painting, it's so bland. If I showed you a close-up, but actually it's a lot of gray in her skin and all this white background and then this simple pattern. We call that minimal. But like I said, well, maybe I didn't. what I've told classes when I'm face-to-face in art survey with students that are not, art majors is, look, we have built-in bias. And so we think we know what art is, or you think you know what art is, but actually you don't. You just come to it with this bias, and you always trust children because they don't have that bias yet. Like when we look at some other abstract works, if I show a child, they won't say, well, that's not art. I know what art is. They haven't learned that yet. They haven't been taught the bias. So here's a wonderful example. If you read this online, this little girl is just staring at this painting of Michelle Obama. And she doesn't take her eyes off it. And her mom is saying, come over here. But she is spellbound by this painting. She would not have been spellbound if it was this stodgy, historically sort of correct way of presenting someone in a way. You see, this little child loves this image. Now, I'm not that child. I can't tell you what she is just fascinated by. Is it the scale? Is it the color? Is it the minimalism? But that's what she's seeing. And that's what you have to do. You have to move with me into the 20th century and to the 21st, which is very challenging. And these are challenging times anyway. So you would see challenging works of art, because if art reflects the culture that exists in, everything you've studied has, those brief, little moments in time, the classical Greek, the Hellenistic, the Roman, all, the early Christian, the Sumerians. Well, what does our work look like in these times? Okay? If art reflects an idea, I didn't say a feeling, our feeling, it can also, but great art, and it does, great art that you find in museums and galleries that, not a Sunday painter. Great art reflects the culture that exists in. And that's where we're going to go. And so in this very brief, just little skimming across the surface of art, I'm just going to show you those styles you need to know that are the underpinning of contemporary art, so that when you go out into the world, you will know where that came from, or you'll see a connection. Now, this is Western. Non-Western are a little different, but you can still see, but all artists around the world still use the elements of art and design, so you can look at that and experience and see how they do it. But in Western art, there's these underpinnings of styles that we continue to build on, okay? So that's where we're going. It's going to be quick. I'm sorry, but we're going to finish up and keep it moving. All right.